I owe my life to one individual. I was taken by this Polish Roman Catholic nun into a house, a basement. So I was kept there a few months after I was born until end of summer, early fall of 1944. So I was kept in this basement for all those years, locked up, deprived of any nourishment, much of the food, stimulation of life. The only person who really gave me the human touch was this Polish Roman Catholic nun.
When Shulamit Bastacky was just an infant, her parents did the unthinkable. They gave her away. But they had good reason. Shulamit was born in Vilna, Poland on August 25, 1941. 2 months earlier, the Nazis had marched into Vilna with the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing squads, murdering the Jewish residents at an alarming rate. In just a few months, they had killed more than 30,000 of the estimated 70,000 Jews in Vilna. The other 40,000 Jews were herded into a ghetto where they would stay until October.
At a certain point, they liquidated the ghetto, and so of course, many of the parents made any possible effort to save our lives.
Shulamit's parents found a Polish nun who was willing to risk her own life to save the baby.
She had to be awfully careful, because if someone would, from outside would see her, would denounce her, she would obviously be killed, and I certainly wouldn't be talking to you today.
When Shulamit was 12 years old, she learned the story of how she survived and about the courageous nun who answered a parent's plea.
My parents chose what to tell me and what not to tell me. And I do not know the procedures, what took place here. It's unbelievable that actually that I did survive that period, and a fairly, shall we say, normal person. But it's simply total deprivation. When I think of kids today, when I speak to students, I tell them, imagine when you were small, you were upset, your mother gave you hugs, love, attention, you had your teddy bears or something to hug. I had nothing to hold on to except that very basic human touch of this nun.
For nearly 3 years, Shulamit survived in that basement. But in July 1944, the Soviet army freed Vilna from the Germans.
So what happened next, as I was told that story, this nun didn't know what happened to my parents, so she bundled me up and put me on the banks of the river or lake, I don't remember which one. There was some Lithuanian guy who found me, and he took me then to a Lithuanian Catholic orphanage.
The story of the fate of the European Jewish children is an especially sad one. By the end of the war, it is estimated that as many as 1.5 million children were killed by the Nazis. The mortality rate for children was extremely high. Sickness and vulnerability made them particular targets. Children couldn't escape as quickly and easily as adults and were not thought to be useful for the Nazi slave labor machine. But thousands of children, including Shulamit, survived by being hidden either physically or with assumed identities, often aided by heroic and kind neighbors and strangers who risked their own lives and the lives of their families to save other human beings.
When the war was over, any parents who survived and had to give up their children were looking for me. So it was easier in those days for a man to look, so my father was looking all over the place, didn't find me where I was left, and totally by instinct, by guts, I don't know how, I don't know what guided him. By luck, he walked into this orphanage, and apparently he called me by my first name. I did not respond. But my father knew that I have a birthmark. He knew what that birthmark was and where it was. I won't tell that part. And that's the only reason and how my father recognized me, because if he would not have recognized me, I would have grown up with a very different identity, and who knows what would have become of me today. Nobody knows that part.
Shulamit's parents, Simon and Dora, had somehow survived the war while being held in a nearby slave labor camp.
Both of my parents were, in a way, if you can call it lucky, so-called lucky, in a local labor camp, slave labor camp. My father was an electrical engineer, so that's what saved me. My mother purely, I would believe, survived by luck. Anyone who is a survivor survived by luck.
But most of Shulamit's family wasn't so lucky. Shulamit lost aunts, uncles, and cousins. She learned what happened to much of her family from her aunt Yocheved, who survived and moved to Israel after the war ended.
She told me that the Germans, the Nazis, forced this one particular group of Jews to go to a synagogue and tragically put the building on fire. And I don't have to tell you what happens when you put much to a building. And in that building, all the people were simply murdered and burned alive. And in that group were 3 generations of that family. My grandmother Esther, may she rest in peace, her daughter Hadassah, that's my father's brother, and she had a boy whose name was Israel. He was about 3 or maybe 4 years old, I don't remember exactly. And that's how they perished.
Vilna was a city that had changed hands back and forth between the Poles and the Russians for centuries. When it was liberated from the Germans in 1944, it remained under Russian control. The Russians allowed Polish citizens to relocate within what was now communist Poland in 1945.
My parents made the choice to leave the area, move to central Poland. And I do remember being on a train that took us to Poland. And I do remember being in a rehab provided by Jewish organizations here, the Joint Distribution Organization, who provided some funds for rehabilitation, some of the survivors and most children because they suffered the most.
Shulamit went to rehab, then elementary and high school, like all children. In 1959, her family decided she should go live in Israel because Shulamit encountered anti-Semitism in her Polish school. She stayed in Israel for 5 years, then moved to the United States in 1963 to be reunited with her parents, who had also left Poland and settled in Pittsburgh. Shulamit went to college, then graduate school, and was a social worker for many years before she retired. She became active in the Holocaust Center. Over the past 12 years, she's spoken to thousands of students.
From 5th grade to university, I've spoken in Catholic churches, and I speak of this issue of hate and ignorance and intolerance, because I remember one of the students asked me, what is my revenge for the Holocaust? I said, young man, there is one response in 3 words: education, education, education. Because we have to fight intolerance and hate with the opposite. I always tell the students that instead of hating, put your love in your heart and see how wonderful things happen.
Shulamit missed a lot of things because of her past. Her first years of life were almost unbearable.
The touch, the affection, the love and tenderness that you miss from your parents. That's such a crucial part of child's development as a child, as a teenager, and as an adult. Not having that personal stimulation of life and tenderness and love. When I speak to kids, I always tell them, when you were little, you had your favorite teddy bears or favorite toys or maybe favorite security blanket. I had none of it. I bought myself my very first teddy bear when I came to this country at the age of 22 because I didn't have too many toys earlier in my life.
She's adopted the teddy bear, in fact, as a way of reaching out. She's exchanged the toys with Germans and others as a way of memorializing those who are not here, for whom there is no one speaking, and at the same time honoring those who made a difference. And Shulamit speaks to honor her own savior, that Polish Catholic nun. They met once more in 1955.
I was about 14 years old way back in Poland, and I remember that she wanted me to stand on a chair just to see, I guess, from her eye level, who is this young person whose life she saved. She's one of the reasons too that I do this. To me, it's kind of a mission. It's not about me, it's just what happened to human beings. My story is not as horrific as those who survived the camps.